Today I'm interviewing Cathleen McCandless. She is the author of Feng Shui That Makes Sense. Kathleen starred in the nationwide television show Feng Shui Living. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, and Martha Stewart Living, plus many more.
Aloha! You've tuned in to the Hawaii Healing Network, and I am your host, Kristina Mekdeci.
Aloha, this is Kristina, the host of the Hawaii Healing Network, and today I'm interviewing Cathleen McCandless. Kathleen is the author of Feng Shui That Makes Sense. This is the #1 best-selling Feng Shui book in the U.S. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Kristina. It's nice to be here.
I had the wonderful opportunity to experience how you would come through a house and do Feng Shui with one of your clients, and you actually redesigned this room to make it so comfortable. Kathleen, what is Feng Shui?
Feng Shui is the study of the environment and how it affects people. It's actually the oldest system of environmental psychology in the world. It was invented about 5,000 years ago by the ancient Chinese as a methodology to live better in the natural environment. And as time has gone by, it's actually a system that we can apply to the built environment. So houses, offices, and buildings like that can all benefit from Feng Shui.
Kathleen, I understand this was not your first career. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and what led you to Feng Shui and what led you to writing the book?
Sure. In the very beginning of my career, I was actually an elementary school teacher. And later, I did some grant writing, and I've always had a strong interest in science. So it led to me working for USC, UC Berkeley, and the Smithsonian Institution. My background is actually in environmental conservation with a specialty in the deforestation of the Amazon basin. So you can see that going to Feng Shui was quite a leap. But what happened to me was I was working in Brazil and I got word that my mother was very sick with cancer. So I flew back to the United States and I was just so devastated, Kristina, that I went into a bookstore and I was looking at the books and this one book kept falling off the shelf, falling off the shelf. I took it home, and it was actually a book written to create a more harmonious healing space for a patient. It wasn't a Feng Shui book per se, because this was over 20 years ago, but it was a book that really caught my eye. So I took it home, read it, there was a little mention of Feng Shui, and after my mom passed away, and I had done all these things in her home that she said really did make her feel calmer, not as afraid, just made her feel better overall. So I went to Europe, I studied with a Feng Shui master, came back to the United States, and just thought, well, I wonder if I could really do this for a living. And I started my career then. Because I'm a research scientist, things have to make sense to me. And I started hearing all this goofy stuff about Feng Shui, like hang a crystal, hang a flute, and none of it made sense. I thought, I can't tell a client this sounds silly. So as I did the research for the origin of Feng Shui, I discovered it really was a system to help people live better in their environment. It was very practical, very common sense. So when I wrote my book, it was basically to give everybody that wanted to know more about Feng Shui background also a way to do their own house in a Feng Shui manner. But more than that, it was a way to educate people, debunk the myths and misunderstandings, and really put some common sense principles into play. And I think that's why the book has been so successful.
I really enjoy and respect how you do incorporate the science with the actual concepts of Feng Shui. Can you tell us one of your favorite myths that you have debunked?
Well, there's so many to choose from. It's hard to know where to start. But one of my favorite ones is that there's a superstition that says if your stairs that go up to your bedrooms exactly face your front door, that all your money will roll down the stairs and out your front door. And I like to tell my students and my clients, it's not like on top of Old Smoky. In other words, your money is not a meatball that rolls down the stairs and out the door. Where it does come from, though, is a really practical application, which most Feng Shui superstitions really did begin in practicality. So 5,000 years ago when Feng Shui was created, it was created in southern China, a land that is very prone to flooding, to earthquakes, to extremes in temperature during the year. And one of the things that they did was they were an agricultural society that actually lived in sort of an area that was very prone to flooding. This is where they farmed their rice paddies and things like this. So when floods would happen, the people needed to build their homes up on stilts. And the way they accessed their living area was through a ladder. And at night, they would pull the ladder up so that people couldn't get to them while they were sleeping. Later, when they built more permanent stairs, they would hide the stairs around the back of the house or put it behind like a false wall so that, somebody that wanted to harm them couldn't find the stairs. So there was a principle, never put your stairs directly where people could access your family while they were sleeping. Over time, the original common sense meaning was lost and it became a superstition. So this is how a lot of things in Feng Shui occurred, but it really made sense at the time.
Kathleen, when you're in a house and you're dealing with esoteric situations and energies and maybe spirits that are left there, how do you explain this and express the important components of Feng Shui with those skeptical clients?
Well, for one thing, the people who call me are probably already on board.
Okay.
And I have actually done lots of houses where there has been spirit activity. I'm not a ghostbuster. I don't do that. However, what happens is it's actually a property in science. It's known as entrainment. There was a Dutch physicist in the 1700s that actually invented the pendulum clock, and his name was Christian Huygens. And what Dr. Huygens discovered is that if he placed several pendulum clocks in a room together, they would synchronize their pendulums to the same swing. And he named this property where the energy of one thing influences the energy of another thing, entrainment. So what happens in our spaces is human beings, animals, and plants give off an electrical field. We can measure it in orophotography. Every emotion that we have sends out a specific energetic imprint or impulse. We can measure those things too. And so as people live in their spaces over a period of time, the space through the property of entrainment, where the energy of one thing affects the other, actually is influenced, the house itself is influenced by the living beings in that place. So even if the people pass on, sometimes there's residual energy from the people that have lived there before, and the people living in the house can still feel it. So what we do is I use a technique called a space clearing, which uses sound waves directed through the space to actually vibrate out those entities or those spirits that maybe people sense as a present or they're uncomfortable with. There's definitely easy ways to get rid of that residual type of energy in the space.
And the sound clearing has scientifically worked?
Oh, yes. In fact, when I wrote my book, I knew I was putting this in print, so I wanted to make sure that I had good background, and I met with an acoustical physicist. And I said, is this true? Would this really pertain or apply to a house? And he said, absolutely. So, and there's a lot of research that's been done in the medical field about vibrational healing and sound healing. So it's just kind of like a sound healing for a building.
That's wonderful.
I'm going to do what I call a space clearing. What space clearing does is it gets rid of the old energy in your space. So how many people do you think have lived here before you have?
Multiple families.
Yeah. Over what, how many years?
Over almost 100 years.
Wow. So that's a lot of energy. When people have lived in a space over a period of time and they're sending out these electrical impulses over and over, through the property of entrainment, when the energy of one thing impacts or marries or matches the energy of another thing, the house basically records that. So essentially what's happening is the molecules and atoms that make up your home are set vibrationally to the people who've lived here before. The cool thing is by utilizing sound waves, we can literally change the feeling of the house. So sound travels best through a medium, meaning a wall or a solid. Also, it travels really well in water. So you surf, you know, you can hear really well underwater. And that's because the sound waves need a medium to travel. So by utilizing sound to clear your space, I'm actually going to be directing sound at the walls, and it's going to send out a frequency that's going to be a high pitch, The sound waves are going to bounce into the building, the structure, going to vibrate more quickly. We're going to let your molecules and atoms vibrate a little more quickly so that any negativity or anything less than excellent, which operates on a long, slow wave, is going to speed up and it just dissipates. This is known as an energy chime, and I love this tool because it's going to raise the frequency of your space so easily. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to direct the sound towards the walls and the ceiling as we go through your space. So you're just listening for loud, clear pitch. And I'm just seeing how I'm feeling as I'm going through your space.
I feel like I want to be open.
So now that you are doing Feng Shui here in Maui, how have things changed? I mean, this is definitely an island style. We're surrounded with water. Has anything in your work recently changed?
Well, the thing I love, I've always been in love with Maui forever, and I knew the first time I was here so many years ago that I would live here. It's just a magical environment. But the reason people are so drawn to Hawaii and to places like this is because it encapsulates the ideal landform in Feng Shui.
Huh.
In Feng Shui, the ideal landform is to have a mountain behind you, gentle hills on either side, and a view of water in the foreground. And that's what we have here. Human beings are also predisposed to be attracted to plants because we need plants to survive, and water. We're kind of hardwired that way. When we have all of these features in one environment, it speaks to us on a very core level. It reminds us of a time when we lived in nature, and we've only lived indoors for an infinitesimal spot on the timeline. So if we look at where human beings have lived, they've always lived outdoors.
Yeah.
And so when we apply what we used as humans to live outside to inside, it really works. And so this is why Maui makes so much sense for so many of us. We instinctively feel that harmony with the land here.
Do you find it's easier to do Feng Shui consultation here because maybe the houses are already set up in the perfect location?
The environment, the big environment, the macro environment, if you will, always affects the way people live even inside.
Sure.
Whether you're living in a busy city or on Maui. The difference is that here in Hawaii we spend so much time outside, and we invite the outside in because we can open our windows and doors year round. So there really is more of a harmony that takes place with the environment. But people that live in cold climates, I do a lot of work in New York City, upstate New York, even in the winter, and so the emphasis becomes more and more and more on how do we create that optimal environment indoors when we have to be inside all year long. And there's definitely so many things that we can do to bring the outdoors in, even in the wintertime.
So I had the wonderful opportunity to experience how you would come through a house and do Feng Shui with one of your clients.
So your kitchen right here, honey, this is your money, and the element is growing plants. Okay. And we want to get the metal out of here. So anything made of metal should be somewhere else, not there.
It's like that here.
Yeah.
Can you explain how easy and sometimes inexpensive it is to just change things in your house to make them more energetically pleasing?
This is one of my favorite things about my job. What I love to do, Kristina, is go into people's houses and work with what they already have. They don't need to spend money. They don't need to buy something new unless they already wanted to. But 95% of the time, I'm just taking what they already have and putting it in a different place. So here we have this lamp. It's real easy to move. So it's a square and a square. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. So you always want to round this off. You see the difference? Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. Hmm? Mm-hmm. And I always make the same joke. It's stale and old. They pay me a lot of money to do that. What's funny and fun is the client's eyes get so big because all of these things have been sitting there the whole time. They've been living with it the whole time. They just haven't had it placed properly to make it optimal or make it feel good. And so just by doing what we did in this house, changing the couch, moving around the furniture a little bit, completely transformed the way the space feels. That is way more fun than buying a bunch of new stuff and sticking it in. It's just wonderful working with what the client already has. Feng Shui is not expensive.
And I think that's so important. I remember my mom did hire someone to help her, but they were convincing her to buy new stuff, change the wall colors. And I watched you come in and just in a day redesign this room with everything she already had.
And she loved it.
She loved it.
And, and it's important to remember when we make a change in our house, especially dramatic change like the furnishings, changing the arrangement like we did here, it takes about 3 days to get used to it. And what's the worst that happens? We just stick it back.
Yeah.
So no, I would never, never, never recommend, that clients have to buy new furniture or move or get rid of what they already have. Let's take what you love and let's work with it so that it shines.
Yeah. That makes you the best Feng Shui consultant out there.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I was reading your book, and by the way, the book is so funny. It's just so light. It's even if you have no house and you live in a tent, this is still a great book to read. Can you explain more about why metal and earth and fire, what those elements look like in the home, and why it's important to put them in specific locations of your house?
Well, as I just said, I did a lot of research on the origin of Feng Shui. Feng Shui and acupuncture were actually developed at the same time in history. And the ancient Chinese were masters at observation. So they knew that we have these invisible meridian lines that travel through our body, known to acupuncturists as, acupuncture points. And they knew that by putting needles or stimulating with even your hands, like acupressure, these specific meridian lines would free up the energy in the human body and make the body run better, essentially. They also knew that the earth itself had magnetic lines or energy lines running through it. The compass was actually invented for Feng Shui. That was its first application. Not navigation, but actually for the Feng Shui masters to be able to define where these energy lines were. So instead of putting a needle in the earth to stimulate the energy, what the Chinese figured out was that the vibrational match of certain elements, water, wood, fire, earth, and metal, which are also used in Chinese medicine, by placing combinations of those elements exactly on those points, not in the general vicinity, not in the area, but on specific points as they run through the house, it seemed to do the same thing as needles do on the human body. It frees up the energy. So we utilize things like maybe there'll be a little spot where you'll put a fountain. I mean, it's just a decorative item. Nobody's going to know that it's your Feng Shui. Or maybe we're going to put a plant somewhere. Or maybe a picture with a metal picture frame. A lamp that's on for a couple hours a day. These things are all decor items. So nobody's going to know that you're doing Feng Shui in your house. They're items you would utilize anyway. We're just putting them in specific locations to help keep the energy free and open in the space. And you know what? As a scientist, sometimes I think, how does this work? How can this be?
It's amazing. That's the thing that I'm most interested in when it comes to Feng Shui. Can you tell us, and this is kind of tooting your own horn, but I was really impressed with the book. So why would anyone, maybe someone who's not even a homeowner, enjoy reading Feng Shui? That makes sense.
The reason I wrote that book was that my clients and my students, but specifically my clients, kept saying, this makes so much sense, you should write a book. I read all this other stuff, it sounded goofy, you should write a book. So what started to happen for me is it was like I was carrying around this big, big backpack of ideas and experience, and I just had to get it out. So I wrote the book, not knowing, of course, what would happen, and it ended up, from the day it came out, it's been a bestseller. It still is, 5 years later. And the reason I think it resonates with people is because it is so practical, because I explain what sounded goofy in other contexts. We explain the origin of Feng Shui and why it works. And also I believe, and I think you can verify, that the book is written very clearly and step by step by step. And it's not hard to do. It's stuff that anybody can do in any home, whether it's a little studio apartment. I've done little tiny, tiny, tiny apartments, and I've done huge mansions. It doesn't matter the size of the space, and it doesn't matter what kind of decor style they have. They could have traditional, modern. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that the space feels good. So what we do in Feng Shui is we go beyond how the space looks, although that is very important, and we want to really address how it feels. And I think that's what the book really accomplishes.
And I've actually used some of your techniques in my very small studio apartment. And they've worked really well.
Thank you.
Kathleen, I understand you're teaching classes here in Maui. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I teach consultants how to be consultants, and frankly, the book's been very popular all over the world. So I have students come from all different countries. And I used to, when I lived on the mainland and I lived in Southern California, people would come and take my course. I teach a big intensive twice a year. And I said to my friend when I first moved to Maui, you know, I'm going to teach a class, but I wonder if they'll come to Maui to take it. And my girlfriend said, why wouldn't they? So I did hold my first class here this past November, and it was wonderful. You had a great turnout, wonderful students. We not only discussed, you know, how to do consultations and how to work with clients, but we also went out into the countryside here on Maui. We went up to one of the sacred lands and had a shaman, learned some of the ancient ways. And I think it was a really powerful experience for students to realize this has been around in one form or another, no matter what name you want to put on it. It's been around since time began. And in this space, to be able to teach in such a beautiful location is such a blessing.
So Kathleen, one of our viewers who lives here in Maui, Hawaii, in Wailuku, her name is Jen, and she wrote, I would like to know more about Feng Shui and why this person feels it makes such an impact on one's life.
Well, 20 years experience, over 1,000 consultations has taught me the power of Feng Shui. And what Feng Shui is, it immerses into every part of your life. It's about honoring yourself enough to have a beautiful space that feels good, honoring your guests. And the thing is, when your space is optimal, there's actually scientific studies that have been done on this. When your space is optimal, your actual DNA and genetic material is optimized. In other words, there are studies that prove that having the optimal environment that feels good, that nurtures you, that feels positive, actually influences your physiology, your mental health, and your emotional health. So there's so much research that supports environmental psychology and Feng Shui. So to answer her question, you know, I couldn't do this long and frankly be this successful if it wasn't true, if it wasn't real. And it's funny because when my book went to the top right away, the book distributor that handles my book account said, we never had a book fly off the shelves like this before.
Wow.
And I made a joke. I said, that's because I have really good Feng Shui. So when you feel optimal, it transfers over to your life.
Yeah.
And that's why it works.
That's amazing. And I just wanted to ask if there's anything else that you could leave with our viewers about your book and about your work you do.
Well, one of the things that I felt so strongly about when I wrote my book is to debunk some of the myths and misunderstandings people have. That's sort of a mission I have in life. And the mission is simple. It's to bring dignity back to Feng Shui. It's to kind of scrape off all the years and years of nonsense and superstition and misunderstanding. You know, it's basically people aren't repeating this stuff because they want to do a detriment to Feng Shui. They just don't know better.
Right.
But when you learn the truth and you learn the majesty of this ancient system, it's hard to go back to hearing these trinkets and talismans and things like that because Feng Shui was never meant to be that. It really is the oldest system of environmental psychology on Earth, and it works. If it feels good, it's good Feng Shui.
I have to say, this is a really good read. It's humorous, and anyone who loves to have scientific backing behind these spiritual concepts, this book I highly recommend. Also, I would recommend that you do have a chance to come out here to Maui, Hawaii, and take one of her classes. And with that, we say aloha.
Aloha, Kristina, and thank you.
Do you want to do that one over?
Sure, we can.
Okay.
Okay.
Just make sure.
Wait, what did I ask you? And cut.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, you got the title of the book wrong, but that's okay.
What? Are you kidding? What did I call it?
Feng Shui living that makes sense.
I said, okay. 4, 3, 2, 1. Aloha, this is Kristina with the Hawaii Healing Network. And today, I'm interviewing... Stop! Sean!
Hey. Oh boy.
Alright.
Cut.
How? Perfect. Okay, good.
That was
Ding, ding, ding.
And I think if we're gonna do this next time, if you want, it's best if you hold the book to your side instead of front of your face and
But for now, it's good enough.
we're just gonna do it now.
Hey!
No, this is so good for bloopers now.
Feng Shui bloopers. All the
I was
group.
kind of worried. I'm like, listen, Kathleen, everyone else has been so easy go. Remember when I had Pete and Lonnie? Like, no nervousness at all. We just went right in first time. But because she's been on TV and you're kind of something. you know.
Well, that's okay.
So I'm like, she's our first real celebrity.
Yeah, right. I wish.
5, 4, don't laugh, 3, 2.
Kathleen, what is Feng Shui?
Feng Shui is the study of the.
Not just me.
No, never just you. You do it again.
And by the way, guys, this is our last question. Well, we'll have a wrap up, and this will be our last question.
And then after that, what do we do?
Go to the beach.
Ke ala o kali